everyone. The wonderful Peter Clayton is behind the camera. I'm Jeremy Cordeaux. Welcome to the Garage and the Court of Public Opinion. It might seem like a strange sort of venue to have a court, but it seemed like a good idea at the time, and it's very comfortable down here. I must admit I do like it. Down in the garage, ladies and gentlemen, and the program brought to you with the very best wishes of Jim Elder's Fine Art Gallery and the Rising Sun Inn just off Kensington Road up there at Kensington. Fine South Australian institutions, and I'm just really glad and thankful to have them on board. Lovely people. The AFL is on course for a head-on collision. It's probably a good way to put it, actually, when I think about it. A head-on collision with the players. The AFL, as you would know, is incredibly wealthy. Pete knows more about it than I do, but they are incredibly wealthy. It's mostly made out of, well, the sponsorship, but it's the broadcast rights for radio and television that really rakes in the money. The players, of course, they are very well paid as well, many of them making $1 million a year and more. The problem is the ever-present danger of injury. Most importantly, and topically, concussion, and the subsequent brain damage leading to early dementia. Now, this is a rough sport, a very rough sport, with all of the inherent dangers and risks. I don't believe that helmets, they're talking about helmets, but I don't think that's the answer. Pete?
The answer, for me, I think they've made the game too fast.
Yeah.
But I know you don't understand, but when they brought in the interchange,
Yeah.
it meant that people could run all over the ground, have a rest. Now, when you and I were growing up, you had two people on the reserve bench.
But hang on, I haven't grown up yet.
But you couldn't run at the pace that they run at now. You couldn't.
Yeah.
You just couldn't do it. So I think they've changed the rules to that point. But these players know the risks when they take up the sport, as I did.
Well, that's a point I want to make too, yeah.
If you don't like, I mean, you take the risk.
Yes.
You accept the responsibility. You don't turn around and sue someone.
Yeah.
You chose to play the sport.
Well, when I went to school in Sydney, of course it was rugby or something like that, but my mother gave me a note because she said, you know, you're not going out there to get beaten up. Well, I didn't play the sport, but I got beaten up anyway. It doesn't matter. I don't believe helmets are the answer because, frankly, the brain is still going to get bruised in a collision. People won't like it because you won't be able to recognise the players as you used to be able to do. You could change the rules and ruin the game, I guess. Or just, well, don't invite the lawyers to the picnic. You know how they love a picnic. Now, the players, as I say, are very well paid for the risks they take. I think a simple disclaimer could be the answer. The players agree not to sue the AFL in the event of injury or any long-term consequence of playing the game. Yeah, I'm getting $1 million a year, I'm going to take the risk. I'm not a lawyer, but I think that could be the simple, inexpensive solution, elegant solution. Anyway, we'll see. We'll see. We are seeing some wage growth in Australia, according to this, which is the wage growth index. But anyway, it should all be connected to productivity, in my opinion, pure and simple, just productivity. That's the way to grow real wages, build bigger, better companies, ultimately the country and the economy. We produce more and better or faster widgets. And of course, Thereby, we, the worker, we, the workers, are worth more money. But you can't just go and say, oh, it's another year, I'm worth more money. No, I don't believe that, never have. You have to put something more in to be worth more. Anyway, as I say, that's just me. Monthly inflation figures out soon. They might tick up a bit, but I don't think there's anything to panic about. Should we have the right, do you think, to work from home? It seems that people are pushing to get this as a matter of course. I was telling you the other day about the federal public servants who are about to get a big new deal, which is, well, it's a big new deal, but the bit that caught my eye was the bit that incorporated their right to choose whether they work at the office or they work from home. Fair Work Australia, they're attending to all of this. They're certainly considering it, and from the federal public servants it'll flow on. And that would affect millions and millions of workers. And of course many more, because if you don't have people in the cities, in the CBDs, there's a huge knock-on effect. You know, think of the cafes and all of the other associated businesses that rely on the city worker. I don't think it's a good idea. Working from home, I mean. I did it reluctantly when, in the middle of COVID, they sent us home from the radio station. I do it joyfully now from the same dining room table. But I do it now because that's the studio. That's the program on a Friday morning. But would I rather be in a studio? Probably. Yep, probably. You know, you just don't have the discipline at home. It's all too relaxed. I remember, I think it was last Friday or maybe the Friday before, it was about 2 minutes to 9, and I went out and I made myself a cup of tea, and there was Tony screaming, "Hey, it's 9 o'clock!" And I just casually walked back in, hit the button, and up came the theme. But you know, that wouldn't happen in a studio. No, I don't think it's a good idea. I think it would entrench a whole lot of things that would be nothing more than a slippery slope. The government makes it illegal to speak to an employee outside working hours. And now the worker can decide where he or she will in fact work. No. He who pays the piper calls the tune. I heard a really good example of talkback radio the other day, the power of talkback radio. It was on 3AW. A caller rang in about an insurance company. And, you know, I was curious to see which company it was. Anyway, to his credit, the announcer said, look, well, he's not an announcer, he's a presenter. He said, who was it? And the caller said, well, it's an insurance company who advertises heavily on your radio station. Now, anyway, she went on to say who it was, Budget Direct. Now these guys, there are a whole lot of them who advertise heavily on the media, television and radio. Budget Direct is only one of them, but there are dozens of them. They're all insurance companies with very nice sort of sounding local names, interesting names. They're all based in South Africa. That's where they're head officed, in South Africa. Now, I don't know anything about Budget Direct, but they spend an absolute fortune, as I say, on advertising, and I must say very clever and very good, very entertaining commercials. all undone with one call, which unleashed an avalanche of more unfavourable calls. Now these people would not, I think the story was, they wouldn't cover her ceiling claim. Her ceiling collapsed. Now I pricked up my ears because I had a ceiling collapse at my home, down where I do the show on Friday morning, in the garage. Pete, do you remember that?
Yes, yeah.
It actually fell, 2 cars in the garage, fell on them. And I rang my insurance company, which was Amy, and through Shannon's, I think Amy owned Shannon's as well, who own or insure my cars as well. They were there in 10 or 15 minutes. Of course they covered it. Of course they covered it. You know, but for an insurance company to say to this hapless lady who rang into 3AW, you know, a ceiling collapse is not in your policy. Really? You wouldn't think to do that. You wouldn't think to put it in your policy. But any insurance company with, well, all that promotion and advertising would have that covered in a flash. I don't think it was in my policy. But who would think a ceiling could fall in anyway? But it's something that happens more often than we would imagine, apparently. Anyway, it's a salutary lesson. Save money on advertising and spend more on customer service and living up to people's expectation even when they are slightly unrealistic. Live up to people's expectations. So easy. Anyway, that's something that I just came across. All this rhetoric about home ownership that's going on at the moment, a lot about affordable housing. Well, it's pathetic really. There are 1,000 different ideas. As I say, particularly when dealing with the government, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You know, we mean well, we're trying to make friends and influence people. Well, nothing has changed, really. The government, with this idea, apparently will partner. They will partner us into home ownership. Well, I'll keep an open mind and I'll keep an eye on that. Then there is this, and I'd like to get these people on the show on Friday. It's called Long View Buying Boost. Long View Buying Boost. And it seems they do pretty much the same as this being partnered into ownership by the government. Well, back in my day, when the bank of mum and dad didn't exist, you had the deposit that you scraped up, and you and your wife went out and worked, and you probably lived off her salary and banked yours. I don't know, that's what I did. You got a mortgage, and then you got a second mortgage. Funny, you never hear anything about a second mortgage these days. Why don't people get a second mortgage anymore? Is that frowned on? Or not possible to get a second mortgage? They were very common in my day. Anyway, as I say, there are all sorts of plans, but you've got to look at them in the cold hard light of day and say, well, you know, somebody walks through the door and says, I'm from the government and here to help you, I'll be wary of him. And somebody who comes in and says, well, listen, I will give you, you know, let's say you've got $200,000 and you're trying to buy a $800,000 house and the bank won't quite get you there. You need another $100,000 to be comfortable. these Longview people apparently will give you, when I say give you, lend you the $100,000, which makes the bank more comfortable and your house more readily accessible to you. But I'm not exactly sure how it works, but I'd like to try and find out if I could. World Radio Day, and the BBC trumpeted, I heard, that women will have the loudest voice today. Now, World Radio Day wasn't today, but when I was listening to it, it was. You don't have to be loud, and you don't have to be a man, and you don't have to be a woman. It's not important. It's not the voice, it's what you say with the voice that should be the point. Next Friday, speaking of the Friday show, we'll have Bruce Ferrier as a special guest on the program. He's going to tell us the story about the wonderful Grace Gibson, one of the first, most successful, perhaps the most famous woman in radio history. There have been many. I grew up with Andrea. Well, I used to listen to Andrea. Not sure why, because it was always aimed at the mums and the dads, as Andrea would say. The mums and the dads. Anyway, like Oprah, she only ever used her first name. Everybody knew who Andrea was. I don't even know what her second name was. I had the great honour of working with her, Andrea. She was quite amazing. Knew everyone. She had danced with the Aga Khan. In fact, she'd slept with the Aga Khan. She was remarkable. She loved men. And if she liked you, she would say, "You can put your shoes under my bed any time you like." And you knew she meant it. She was way before Germaine Greer, way before Women's Lib, way ahead of everything. Very colourful woman. She took on, in fact, that was when I was doing her sort of, I was not straight man. I basically did her commercials, time calls, sat opposite her, put her calls through to her. I was only, what, 22 years old or something. Anyway, I never knew how old she was. She was timeless. But she got into trouble with the radio station, and that Andrea show was all over the Macquarie network. Every station in Australia took that 9 o'clock program of hers. Very successful. She took on with, and God knows why, a man called Darcy Dugan. You can look it up, but he was a well-known, well, there's no point in gilding the lily. He was a criminal. He'd spent more time in jail than he had spent more time on the street. And for some reason, she decided to protect him and to champion him. And she would bring him around to functions and bring him into the station. And, you know, the station ultimately just couldn't cope with it. And prematurely ended her career, even though in those days she would have probably been 80 or 85, but they just couldn't cope with Darcy Dugan. You can Google Darcy Dugan. It's a very colourful story. He was in a way a bit like
Al Capone or Frank Nitti or...
Well, Al Capone, yeah, probably an Al Capone. Colourful. Controversial. Always somewhere near the front page of the paper. Anyway, let's see what else have we got. The RBA is going to be meeting next week. They said last month that they almost had to increase the interest rates. Almost had to increase the interest rates. Well, next month I predict there'll be no hike. But they'll talk about the possibility of one. You see, this is the thing. It's not so much putting the interest rates up, but telegraphing the message that spending and a vigorous economy is going to lead to more inflation. So if the Reserve Bank can scare the pants off us by telling us that an interest rate is on the cards, it'll have the same effect as putting the interest rates up, but it won't hurt quite so much. You see what I'm coming from? If spending keeps climbing and wages keep rising, it's all inflationary. But the government thinks that we won't notice. More money in our pocket? Hey, that's what they're interested in. Just more money. But it can lead to inflation. And if it all disappears in higher prices, are we that stupid? Possibly. How much time have I got, Pete? None. Sorry. Okay. And again without my glasses. I'm going to find them, I know I'll find them. It's the 29th of February. Wow. Is that leap year, Pete?
Yes, yes.
Wow, happy leap year. Golly, it was a lovely story about a 100-year-old woman who was in fact only 25 years old.
Yes, I saw that.
How about that? Davy Jones, British singer and actor, The Monkees, Daydream Believer. Who wrote Daydream Believer?
John Stewart.
Who did?
John Stewart.
John Stewart.
Yeah.
Great song, I love that. Love that. Hit in 1967. I remember it well. Dies from a heart attack at the age of just 66. The year was 2012. Christopher Columbus uses a lunar eclipse to frighten hostile Jamaican Indians in 1504. Tony Robbins, the American motivational speaker, was born. I talked to him once. He's a very interesting character, Tony Robbins. Born in 1960. Jonathan Coleman, Anglo-Australian entertainer, was born in 1956. Australian swimmer Dawn Fraser records the fastest 100-metre freestyle of her brilliant career, smashing her own record of 58.9 seconds in Sydney. Goes on to win her third straight gold in the event at the Tokyo Olympics, 1964. On this day, and then she harmlessly climbs a flagpole and gets banned for life or some such nonsense. Anyway, 1960, I like Dawn Fraser. She's a nice lady. 1960, the first Playboy Club featuring bunnies opens in Chicago. What's the connection between bunnies and Playboys, I wonder? Anyway, that was 1960. The beginning of a bobtailed era. John Hope. He was Lord Hopetoun. He dies Governor General of Australia. In fact, he was the first Governor General of Australia. 1908. Dies on this day. The first people are accused of witchcraft in Salem, Massachusetts. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne. And Tibula, who was a West Indian slave, all accused of witchcraft. 1692. It doesn't say what their fate was, but I'm quite sure it wasn't going to be pleasant. Hattie MacDonald becomes the first African-American woman to win an Oscar for Gone with the Wind in 1940. Pierre Trudeau announces he is stepping down after 15 years as the Canadian Prime Minister in 1984. And I'll give you one more. 1968. The US ends regular flights with nuclear bombs on board. Yeah, I remember this story. 1968, the US performs a nuclear test at Nevada test site. But anyway, going back to the regular flights, these were B-52 bombers. These huge aeroplanes. You can't, bigger than a 747. And you can't imagine how this thing, I think it had 8 jet engines, and each jet pod hanging under each wing had 2 jets attached to it. It was an enormous aeroplane. And they had, I don't know how many of them, but there would be one in the air all the time. And it was a thing called SAC, the Strategic Air Command. And SAC was charged with the responsibility of, in the event of nuclear war, that aircraft that would be out and about with nuclear bombs in case of an attack on the United States, continental United States, and for some reason America couldn't get missiles in the air or something, it had a whole handful of nuclear bombs on the B-52, which would immediately be routed to Russia. What's changed? Nothing's changed, really. Same old story, isn't it? Anyway, they refueled them in the air, and they stayed in the air until such time as they would get another one up that would take up the role. But there was never a moment during these Cold War years that there wasn't a Strategic Air Command B-52 nuclear-equipped bomber ready to go. I don't think we sort of see that kind of readiness anymore. Perhaps that's good, perhaps it isn't. Thank you very much for viewing the Court of Public Opinion, ladies and gentlemen. Happy leap year day or whatever it is, and we'll talk in the morning, 9 o'clock, around the dining room table. JeremyCordeaux.com if you want to tune in. We got guests, we got phone calls, we got music, we got all sorts of stuff. Believe in yourself. Peter Clayton and I will be back. Have a lovely weekend, and bye for now.